Hello and welcome to LGBT Leaders, an interview series hosted by the Financial Times LGBT Employee Network ProudFT. My name is Jamie Brown, Senior Software Engineer and co-lead of ProudFT here at the Financial Times, and we're excited to host this stream celebrating some of the most influential LGBT leaders in the world of business. In this interview series, we have the opportunity to delve into experiences, challenges, and triumphs of these exceptional individuals. Throughout the course of these streams, you'll get to hear inspirational stories, invaluable advice, and insightful discussions, all shared by industry-leading guests. We will explore the paths they have traversed, the wisdom that they have gained, and the strength they have discovered to shape their careers while making a lasting impact. But before we begin the stream, I would like to take this moment to highlight the Financial Times' commitment to fostering an inclusive, progressive work environment. As an organization, we take immense pride in being forward-looking LGBT plus employer. We firmly believe that diversity and inclusivity are the cornerstones of success, and it's our unwavering commitment to these principles that allow us to thrive. If you would like to learn more about what we do here at the Financial Times and our commitment to inclusivity, please go to our careers website, which should be showing on the screen in a second. And while that's up there, I will just talk about some of our recent advancements. We've currently introduced a comprehensive trans inclusion policy designed to ensure that every member of the trans community feels supported, respected, and empowered to bring their whole selves to work. We've also incorporated new provisions for gender-affirming healthcare in our private healthcare offerings. These measures demonstrate our dedication to providing a safe and inclusive space for all employees, irrespective of their gender identity or expression. So now that's over, let me introduce our interviewer for today. We have Josh Spiro, our Associate Arts Editor, who will be interviewing the amazing Tag Warner, who is CEO of Gay Times. But before I hand over there, we also have a slide for questions. So we have a Slido platform which you can scan the QR code. So if you think of anything throughout this thing, scan that code right now, and you'll be able to send some questions to Tag. We'll put this back up at the end as well. So there's no worry there, but if anything comes up, just ask questions. But yeah, I'll hand over to Josh and Tag now.
You're a leader, but you're also very young. It sounds really bad, but you became the CEO of is now GT Group when you were what, 23?
24.
24. Tell us, sounds like a pretty rocketing rise. Tell us about your career path at that point and how you became the CEO.
Sure, and nice to be here, by the way. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. So I went through University of Manchester, loved that experience, and through that I was kind of obsessed with the world of work, really. Any chance I could get to not be a student and to do work, I did. So I did all sorts of things, mostly around aviation. That was my high school job, was checking people in at an airport where I grew up in Jersey. So I did various stints at places like British Airways and Heathrow Airport, and just kind of really fell in love with, I guess, customer experience. And I think that's part of kind of the genesis, if you like, of where I got to Gay Times. So there's a bit of that. I then went into management consultancy. I worked for a firm called PA Consulting for 2 years. Also loved that. That was all about business transformation. And just found it really interesting to go into big companies and sort of understand like the complete, let's be honest, the kind of often the kind of messy nature of the corporate world. But after that, I was like, I have to do something purposeful. I've always been really proud of my own identity. I came out when I was 15 years old, and I never had any qualms about my own identity as a gay person and as a queer person. And I felt like I needed to marry up this kind of world of work with my own identity and do something that I really cared about. So I started freelancing, and I actually did a small freelance gig at a kind of indie magazine, if you like, in East London. It was brilliant. We had absolutely no money. I remember we sort of did jobs for sort of a few grand here or there. We felt very excited by. But that experience kind of made me fall in love a bit with media and kind of creating media. And that was an indie magazine that was steered towards the gay community. And actually the previous CEO of Gay Times at that point got in touch with us and said, look, you guys are doing really cool stuff. We need to be a bit cooler. We're not very cool currently. Gay Times is actually 40 years old next year. So we've been around for a really long time. And we need to kind of update. So he said, look, would you come and do a bit of consultancy for us? And we kind of reluctantly said yes. We weren't that keen on it. But as I said, we actually weren't making any money, kind of living paycheck to paycheck. So we had no choice. So we went and did a consulting job at Gay Times. And quite quickly after me and this colleague of mine started there from this indie magazine, the kind of brief shifted from help us out to be a bit cooler to find new leadership, because the CEO was wanting to step down, he wanted to move on to other things. And so that's how that all began. And in that process of finding other CEOs, the other consultant with me at the time actually kind of kept saying, look, I feel like you keep talking about, who we're going to go and find, but the more you talk about it, the more I see that you might be able to do this. So it took a little bit of convincing, because of course, at the age of 24, I was like, I have no business being a CEO. I don't know the audacity to do that. I thought it was ridiculous. But he really convinced me to do it. And then the rest is kind of history. I went through that process, if you like, took about 6 months, and then got the job at the beginning of 2019.
So tell us a bit about the queer media landscape when you joined and how it's changed now, because I think you described Gay Times as GQ for white gays.
Yeah, totally.
And that maybe seems typical of, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. Is that still the case in lots of the queer media landscape, or do you think things have been changing? And what have you done at Gay Times as CEO to help evolve that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely changed for the better. I think that media in general, I mean, we know this, obviously we're in that kind of holistic industry, if you like, has always really struggled with diversity. If you look at the scope of kind of British media in particular, predominantly journalists are all white, predominantly cisgendered, often from more privileged backgrounds as well. So I think media as a whole has always struggled. And so queer media is no exception to that. It's just a sort of sliver of a greater industry. So when I came into Gay Times, I think Gay Times and other media companies in the LGBTQ space was really, I guess, suffering from that same setback, because it is a setback. You're not able to really speak to the holistic community when you're only really employing and working with working with the creatives and talent that all really just sort of represent a small part of the community. I would say that queer media as a whole has got better, and I'm happy that we are a part of that. But it took some tough changes. I didn't keep on nearly any of the team that I inherited. And I think that those difficult changes in the first couple of years as I became CEO was to take the business through a lot of change. We changed our business model, we changed the brand, we went through a big brand refresh, we digitized, we don't have a print magazine anymore. We went through all of that, which of course, again, lots of media companies have been through that challenging process and kind of come out the other side a lot better and stronger. But I think the real success has been in understanding that our editorial staff, our creative staff now represent a much greater and wide breadth of LGBTQ identity.
So since we're here, as Jamie said, to hear your wisdom and your strength, what wisdom have you accrued about making those difficult decisions? How do you, if our viewers want to know in your situation, how would they act? What advice would you give them about making those tough choices? How do you carry them out? How best to minimize upset and problems and blowback?
I think one of the first lessons that I learned, which was a tough one, is that as the CEO of a company, your job is to not be that popular. You're not there to be people's friend. And I was really young at the time, right? If you're in your 20s, you're kind of also personally in a space where you're trying to make your friends. You're trying to work out, who am I going to date? Who am I going to be around? So having to sort of, segregate that in myself and go, okay, I'm still someone in their mid-20s and, of course, getting older at this point. But actually, I'm not here to be people's friend. I'm here to run a business and I'm here to make the right decisions for the business. That was a big challenge to get through that. But I would say if that kind of one piece of advice is that, absolutely, you want to get along with your colleagues, you want to have great working relationships with them. But the one thing that I said is that when I came into the company, the narrative I kept hearing from, our previous CEO at the time is, remember, this is a family. We're a family here. And I remember thinking like, ugh, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, because actually, is a kind of dysfunctional family the right way to run a business? Or actually, do we need to have more understanding of each other, expectation of each other, understanding what our strategy is, what our belief systems are, our values? Those are things I was interested in, sort of not being this sort of, lovely but slightly dysfunctional family.
So how do you manage that then? How do you take people, how do you restructure a company? How do you take people through difficult times? Do you have any tips? You've said, you have to be authoritative, but sometimes you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. How do you What's the money side
of course.
things?
Well, I think what I really enjoyed about that transition period was talking about the vision that I had for the company and trying to inspire both our existing staff and the new staff and our contributors coming in about where that kind of North Star is, to use kind of corporate speak.
Oh, the FT has a North Star as
Okay,
well.
fine. I love a North Star. So I talk a lot about our North Star, but also being open and honest with your own team and your stakeholders, that North Star kind of shifts every now and again, and being transparent about why it's shifting and where you're headed. And I remember trying to get people to really believe that we could be something much greater than we were. I remember a lot of the vibe of the company, and this is not about Gay Times, this is about, I think, queerness in general, was, oh, we're just a small media company struggling along. You know, we're never going to reach the heights of these big media greats. We're never going to be taken seriously. You know, if we wanted to work with someone in particular, whether that be an amazing writer or a particular celebrity, oh, we're never going to get them. We're not good enough. And I think a lot of the work that I did was actually trying to get people's own sense of personal self-worth there. So we spent a lot of time on culture, working with psychologists, working with people that understood the LGBTQ experience to actually try and get people to feel personal self-worth so that they could then come to work and bring that confidence into the organization.
So it sounds like you had to do a lot of therapy as much as...
Oh, I did a lot of therapy. I would say, if you think that I've got kind of, only because it sounds quite good, tag team, I do have a tag team. So I have a group of advisors and supporters that help me. I would say I have a psychologist I've worked with for about 8 to 9 years now. And her role with me really shifted from, personal therapy into how are you going to be a leader, but then also how are you going to work with people and how are you going to, work with them with their challenges, but also, the great stuff about them as well. So I would say, and I've talked about this actually a bit before, when I meet other CEOs in the space or in technology and they don't have psychological support, I kind of think, how are you doing this? I would always recommend if you are a leader, if you can get psychological support, get it.
It's interesting. You said that there was a sort of self-image that we're queer, we're a queer part of media, we can't achieve very much. Do you think that's endemic or was endemic in queer media more broadly? And why do you think that is?
I think it probably reflects where society was. So if you look at queer rights as a whole, a lot of the time, the kind of fight for recognition has been about fighting to be recognized by what I often term as the default society. So default society, I would normally class in the UK at least as white, cisgendered, heteronormative, maybe even Christian, depending on how far you want to push it. So oftentimes the kind of queer struggle, if you like, for recognition has been looking at the default society and saying, hey, we exist, you need to give us the same rights, we need to be able to get married, we need to be able to do the things that you can do. And I think that's why I kind of say, and it's a bit haphazard of me, but it's kind of the honest truth, I often talked about it as GQ for gays, because what Gay Times and lots of other magazines were doing when I read them, when I was a kid, was they were saying, look, if you get the right haircut, if you go to the gym, if you look like a man, then you'll be accepted. And that's the way to be gay, is actually to emulate straight men. And that's the way you'll be accepted in society. And I actually think, and I don't blame anyone for it, because no wonder they were sort of always trying to ascertain that kind of, straightness in themselves, if you like, in order to be taken seriously as an individual, but also as a company. And I think the more that we started to actually reject those sort of ideals of heteronormativity or sort of default, living in a way, the more able the queer people in the organization were to say, actually, we don't have to do it this way. There are other ways of existing, of loving, of being in a relationship, of identifying as an individual. And that kind of flexibility, both in their own identity and the organization, I think allowed us to be a lot more successful, because we were ultimately sort of, always trying to get approval from a kind of, I don't know, an en masse group, if you like, that was never going to ultimately come.
I can't tell if this is a company or a commune.
I think that the sort of like mix of business and corporate and that sort of like personal identity is actually what I love about it. And it's a difficult balance, don't get me wrong, because you're mixing like personal identity, which is so personal, with like making money. So it's a challenging mix.
And what does it look like now? In what ways have you changed it, and how do you feel that it's grown?
I think that the thing I was really excited by is the fact that we have this ability to talk to a huge audience, and we weren't really tapping into the digital platforms that exist. So one of the first things I did with our editor at the time, an amazing guy called Lewis Corner, and I have to give him a shout out. He just won Editor of the Year at the PPA Awards last week, so congratulations, Lewis. We worked together on this new strategy, and I appointed him into that role when I came in as CEO. And we said, look, we're going to really invest in digital platforms. And so the whole moniker at the time was like, all the good stuff goes in print and everything else gets dumped online. And I think that, again, when I speak to friends that have been in big media companies, they said that a lot of the time the culture was a bit similar there. So instead, we were like, we're going to really focus on digital platforms. So they exploded. We were speaking to maybe 100,000 odd audience members a month. That's now anywhere between 20 to 25 million. So I think that kind of rocketing growth meant that the brand itself was being more known. People were trusting in it. People were looking to us for information. And on the business side, again, it's no secret that media companies have kind of struggled a bit to find their feet in this day and age of like, where are we going to monetize? Are we going to do subscriptions? Are we going to do branded content? Are we going to do advertising? We really honed the branded content and the advertising proposition because we knew that brands wanted to interact with LGBTQ plus consumers, but they were struggling a little bit. And of course, even just this weekend, we've seen, people are still struggling a little bit to get that right. But we thought we're the experts in LGBTQ plus, so we can help them. I think our next challenge, to be very honest, and I'm excited for this over the next year, is to start looking at our direct to consumer proposition, because we've really focused on broadening the brand out, getting these big audience numbers, getting the branded content right, the advertising piece right, and now it's about shifting back to that direct to consumer proposition.
What do you think that might look like?
I think we've seen a hell of a lot of interest from consumers in really high quality LGBTQ information. I personally don't believe that the sort of becoming the sort of Daily Mail of LGBTQ plus is the right strategy. Just going for
the Daily Mail of anything, the Daily Mail of the Daily Mail.
If someone in a few years, and I'm not saying this just because we're here, but if someone in a few years said, actually Gay Times has got, the kind of quality reporting like the FT does, but for an LGBTQ audience, that would be an amazing place for us to get to in 5-10 years time. I don't think you'll see Gay Times going down the sort of clickbait route. We're not interested in salacious headlines. We're not interested in also, frankly, riling up a lot of the time the hatred towards our own community, which I see other queer companies doing.
Which I was going to ask about. How have you found operating in this landscape where things in the past couple of years seem to have got markedly worse in lots of ways for queer people, not just in the UK, around the world, and especially trans people? How have you found operating in that context?
It's incredibly challenging. I mean, I said we sort of about 3 to 4 years ago started changing the operating model and our business model and our revenue model quite significantly and focusing on brands. Now, of course, what we've seen, sadly, is a lot of the brands we work with who are great allies and have done great work have really stood by us and they've stood by the community. But some have actually kind of blown in the other direction of the wind now and said, look, this feels a bit too difficult, a bit too political, we're stepping away. And that's challenging because, of course, not only does it sort of send a message to the community, which is we're here for the good times, when the times get rough, we're going to go, but also for a company like Gay Times, and that's one of our main sources of revenue, of course that impacts us.
What do you say to people when they say you're just too political for us now?
I think that I say that the queer community has always been political, and the very sort of essence of being queer is political in itself. And that, yes, we were sort of, waving pride flags 3 years ago and pretending everything was brilliant. But actually, we're seeing and we're understanding more of the challenges in a public view today. They were always there. We're just seeing them at the forefront now.
I want to come back to pride in a minute, but we have a couple of questions. So let's just start with, how do you help to influence bigger organizations to be LGBTQ plus inclusive?
We do a few different things at Gay Times. So we do everything from sort of consultation strategy, mostly around brand and marketing. We tend to not go into a company and start advising them on their employee networks and that kind of thing. And there's some great consultancies out there that do that. But we spend more of the time on the brand and marketing side. And I think that we often try to speak to organizations about really making commitments to LGBTQ rights all year round. That's a great place to start. Typically, organizations love to talk about this during Pride month or season, and then the rest of the year it goes away. And we really have done some great work. So I'll call out, for example, we've done work with Apple for a few years, and they were one of the first companies actually to partner with us on year-round activities, both internally at Apple, externally to the consumer audience. And what that means actually is that the consumer audience looks a lot more favorably towards them. Their own employees feel a lot happier about it. There's simple things like that that I think kind of go a long way.
What are your expansion plans for GT? You've told us already about more direct to consumer. Are there any other things that you've got in mind?
We're really excited about a few things at the moment. So we've actually just taken on investment, which is very exciting to grow the company. I think one thing that we're really interested in is the United States. I've spent a hell of a lot of time in the US over the last year. And I think that what we've noticed is that the quality and the kind of equity and the trust behind the Gay Times brand has really traveled in the US. I think consumers over there see it as and a kind of an exciting, fresher brand, which is quite ironic considering we're 40 years old. But we're really excited about the US and what we do in the UK and expanding that over there. And we've already made those steps.
The US is in some ways a graveyard for British media companies trying to expand there, and also particularly even homegrown queer media companies like them and things, have found it difficult, and the ones associated with Grindr, Logo TV, all of these have not necessarily thrived. I mean, I'm not saying any of them haven't, but some of them have found it difficult. Is that something you're worried about?
I've been thinking about the US for like 4 years, and I'm really doing my work there. I've spent, as I said, a lot of time working with the local community and building up trust. So I'll give you an example. Gay Times has been the official headline media partner of New York Pride for about 4 years now. And so I spent about 2 weeks in New York, in the last month. And so just going out into the streets there and having people coming up to us and the team, telling us what Gay Times means to them from a consumer perspective. But not only that, but saying it's quite amazing to them, at least this is their words, that they feel more of a closeness to our brand, more of a trustness in their brand than they've ever felt in their homegrown media brands. And I think that's because we're very thoughtful with our approach. We kind of do the work on the ground level with the community. And I think sometimes when you've got the import coming in, it can sometimes come across as, we're here, we're successful in the UK, so you should be adopting us because, we do good work. So why wouldn't you want us here? And actually, I think a lot of the time, audiences, not just in the US, but anywhere, especially queer audiences, can be a bit more tentative and a bit more mistrusting. So them is a really great example, because I think that brand, and we've got some great friends at them, and I think they do some amazing work, but because it comes from the House of Condé Nast and kind of what that represents, I think they were always going to really struggle to get that trust from the community.
Another question. What's the main challenge you faced in your career?
Oh, so many challenges. I think that, oh God, this is a really tough one. I think the main challenge that I'm finding at the moment is, as someone that's so passionate about what I do, and I guess so excited by the future, having to kind of really consolidate that down, saying no to things, being very specific with what we're doing is always something that I personally struggle with. And I have to be honest, I often look to my executive team and the people around me to help me make some of those calls about what are we going to not do? What are we going to be saying no to? And what are we going to be concentrating on? That's a wonderful place to be, because when you've got lots of opportunity in front of you, the kind of instinctive one is to say, I'm going to say yes to everything. But I would say definitely one of that. And the other thing is sacrifice. Again, I always try to be really open as a leader that I'm also a human being. I have my own personal life. Really difficult. Sometimes you sort of sacrifice your own love life. You don't spend time with your friends. You see your family a lot less because you put so much into the work. And I think being realistic that those sacrifices are sometimes what you need to make are difficult, and they play on your mind a little bit sometimes.
Another question. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for asking questions. It's always good to have audience interaction. What would your main advice be for someone to get into media who is a queer person?
I would say the best thing you can do nowadays, and I always say this to people, self-publish. Like, there are some great platforms out there that you can publish on. I love it more than anything if someone sends me a link on Instagram or an email and says, hey, I'm this person, just wanted to put this in, on your desk, sort of metaphorically. Don't need to reply, not looking for any sort of feedback or validation, just want to let you know I've done something. I have to say, if you do that a few times, and it doesn't just have to be me, of course, They can be other people in Gay Times, other queer media companies. It's a really effective way of getting attention by saying, hey, I'm kind of productive, I'm doing something, and I'm also kind of doing it off my own back. And a lot of the time, whether it's writing or going out in the streets with your camera on your phone, you can create and do some great things without a hell of a lot of time and money. I would say that's more effective than sort of shouting for attention, if you like, saying, hey, I'd like something, or give me a budget, or give me something to do something, when you haven't necessarily proven to yourself or to anyone else that you're able to do that. So because we have social media, places like Medium, even just LinkedIn, self-publish, start doing it and showing people that you're doing it, and I promise that's a really effective way of getting attention.
I like this idea that LinkedIn could be like the new repository of radical queer information.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a good thing to happen to LinkedIn.
Yes. It's better than some of the content on there.
And actually, the last question I think we've got time for is actually what I was going to ask. Well, it wasn't quite what I was going to ask, but it relates to what I was going to ask. What was your highlight of Pride Month?
I would say I love New York Pride in particular because you have the official march, which is similar to Pride in London. So that's your barricades, your police everywhere, stewards, but you also have the community organized marches. There is nothing really more exhilarating and political than just walking into an avenue in New York and just stopping traffic. There isn't any barricade there, and there's a bit of sort of excitement and fear there, and that kind of duality. But I would say walking in the Queer Liberation March, walking in the Drag March, and I try and do as many as I can. I think I did 4 this year, and they're often really grassroots communities that come together and say, look, we're just going to meet in a park at this time, and we're going to walk out in the street and make a political statement and sort of really push for to be heard by both the local community and also the queer community as well. So getting to walk in those marches, you meet amazing people, you get these amazing sort of on the ground conversations, and that is priceless. You can't, no amount of research or audience interaction or surveying gives you that on the ground experience.
And Gay Times also took a presence by the Pride March this year. You had not a shop, you had a space, a creative space. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because that's another thing that a lot of media companies are doing, having a physical presence.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also in our expansion plans. We've just kicked off we're calling it our activation strategy. So we do a huge event every year called Gay Times Honours, nicknamed the Queer VMAs or the VM Gays, which is basically a big award show concept for queer people in London, and it's getting bigger each year. But not only that, we said, okay, great, awards are lovely, but they're very sparkly and celebby. How do we do something really community focused and just have the general public come into a space that is Gay Times branded and Gay Times owned? So we worked actually with the Crown Estate, and we had an amazing store on Regent Street, which is, of course, amazing location really to have in that partnership. And you could come in and you can make a placard. So whether you are marching in Pride in London or London Trans Plus Pride or UK Black Pride in a month's time, you can make a placard with any statement you like, and we'd give you the materials to do that. And what I loved mostly was just seeing people create something and interacting with other community people as they were doing that, family and friends, people they'd never met. It's a wonderful way to kind of bring people together over a shared experience.
Good. This is I think this will be our last thing. If you could give a quick answer, how do you think AI will change how Gay Times works over the next few years?
We've had many conversations about this, and all I can say is we're working on a really exciting project. I can't talk about it, which I know is annoying.
Can you call it Gay Eye?
I like that idea. Okay, we'll finish on that. Gay Eye. That's the code name for the project.
Okay, well, we'll watch this space. Tag Warner, thank you very much for spending this time with us, and I hope it's been interesting to you, all of our viewers.